Welcome back to our final video on Chapter 7. We've been looking at intelligence and other forms of cognition, and we're going to wrap up by talking a bit about language and use that as a transition to talk about some other animals besides humans. Now, language is, of course, our system of communication. That could be the noises that we make or the symbols that we draw, as long as it's some sort of symbolic representation of what exists in our mind. Currently, language is that thing that helps me know what's in your mind. In fact, it's really all that we have. We can watch your behavior, certainly, but language is best served to express and to understand just what that behavior was. Now, there is certainly a debate in trying to figure out who on this planet has language. Humans we accept, but of course that's skewed towards our own perspectives. While there are many animals that communicate in amazing ways, are they exactly using language? Because language is a very complex system, something that can help us process information, to think about the past, to talk about the future. And if other animals do this, it's been very difficult to understand. So we'll poke at this idea a bit and see what we can find. We'll start first with basic properties of language. It doesn't matter what language you natively speak. If it's written or spoken, they all have the same rules. First is phonology. It's what sounds we use to express that information. We all make noises with our mouth, assuming that we use verbal linguistics. That's what I'm doing now on the microphone. But we have to learn how to put those sounds together, and that's morphology. So when I was a kid watching children's programming, I might see something on TV that said "k," "at," "cat," showing me that if I put those sounds together, it can now be a word and represent the thing in front of me. Semantics are the meanings of those words. I just said cat, which is just simply a noise that represents a certain animal I wish to discuss or to talk about. You may use the word neko. You may use the word gato. Those are different words for cat, at least in different languages, but they all are verbal constructs, and that is the meaning of the word. And finally, we have pragmatics, which is beyond the meaning of the words, because as humans, and again, language can be a very complicated thing. You could ask me how my day is going, and I will say, I am doing fine. Well, according to the semantics, my words say that I'm okay, but there seems like there's a message beyond the literal semantics or definitions of those words. And so we have very nuanced ways to communicate with tone, with our posture, with body language, and those words as well. Now, language is a relatively new acquirement in our history. As far as humans have been on this planet, we have not been talking that whole time. In the last 100,000 years seems to be about where we're making sounds, at least based on anthropological records and explorations of our human origin. Now, there's been quite a bit of debate in the last few decades of exactly where language comes from. Is this something that is built into us, a biological process unique to humans, or are we conditioned by our environment to create this thing called language? B.F. Skinner, someone we learned about in the Chapter 5 videos, was a behaviorist. They believe that the environment or nurture side of the equation is what makes all behaviors happen. And so, according to Skinner, the reason why we have language is we are conditioned. You make a noise, you are reinforced by being paid attention to, and then throughout the months and years, you are shaped through reward and punishment and making the correct noises that ultimately will be your language. And there is some evidence to support this viewpoint, especially if we think about all the different languages in the world with different rules, different syntax, different grammar, but ultimately help us communicate in the same way. Or those of us born and raised in America who speak English as a native language, we realize we have different accents, different words that we use for different items depending on the region that we're from. That's all environmental conditioning. But Noam Chomsky disagreed. He was a language theorist who believed that language is a unique human ability, and he believed we are born with something within our mind. Basically, we are wired from birth to have a window to where we can learn language, and he called this a language acquisition device. Kind of makes sense if you think about that. The language-specific areas of the brain are some of the largest and most active forms. One of the reasons that we also believe Chomsky had at least some claim to this point was if we look at case studies with feral children, children who, through unfortunate circumstances, their families died and they were left in the wild. They survived several years and then were reclaimed by men and women. We found that if those children missed a certain developmental period, they could never learn language. A couple of years ago, a similar case happened. You may have seen in school or on video. An unfortunate girl named Jeannie was locked inside a basement for about 13 years. She was given food, water, and nothing else, and she had no human contact outside of that. When she was recovered, and though this has been at least a decade or more since this happened, she missed that important window. She cannot and will not learn language as we know today. So Chomsky might be right to a certain degree. It seems that we are wired to learn language within a certain limitation. Once we learn it, have at least one language or one system of rules in our pocket, we can learn other languages later on. They follow similar words and similar rules regardless of the differences that might appear. Now, there are some milestones in learning language that seem to be fairly universal to humans regardless of what language you speak. We coo around 2 months. Around 6 months, we add hard consonant sounds. Around 7 to 8 months, we start using our body in addition to try to communicate ideas, such as holding our hands up to be picked up. And by the first year, 12 months, we typically see moms and dads report baby's first word, meaning they actively identify and then use that verbal signature. So these do seem pretty common milestones. Again, like any average in a child's development, you have a pretty wide window when you see some of these appear. Now, if you are interested in talking to your babies and want to make sure that your child develops language at a comfortable and appropriate level, here's a couple of suggestions for you. First of all, be active in the conversation. Even as your baby makes noises that are not words, make sure to respond, because language is often about you make a noise, I make a noise, and we create that pattern of communication. Secondly, talk as if the infant can understand what you are saying. Right? By using the words that you have, you will find yourself not only teaching them basic rules, grammar, and things like that, you'll find that you'll create a narrative for them. You might say to one of their noises, yes, that is a dog, and you point to the dog and you look at the dog, and you're starting to reinforce or condition which words mean what. And finally, though parents still debate about this today, about whether you should talk as an adult to a child or should you use those exaggerated sounds such as, you are a cute little baby, yes you are, which we call parentese, both are fine. Neither one of them is bad for your child's development in the first year of life. If you talk as if you normally do, that's fine. Kids will be fine. If you talk in the parentese, well, that over-exaggeration is teaching children how to change their pitch in speech. It's showing where words start and stop. That is fine. Now, once your child starts talking back to you, yes, you should probably abandon parentese and start talking more in your regular conversation tone. But in the early year, it's perfectly fine. So as promised, let's wrap up this video and this chapter by looking at some other animals. And one of the great debate is, now let's talk about intelligence, about cognition, about language. Are we the only animal on this planet that has such devices? It's a good question, and one I'm afraid to say is quite difficult to answer. One of the reasons why it's difficult to answer is all those previous slides you just saw. Language. One of the main, if not the main reason I know you can think is that you can communicate that to me in some way or another. But with animals, all we have is their behavior to observe, and we have to make inferences about what they are doing, what they're thinking, and perhaps even what they're feeling. That's kind of the big question. If we ask men and women around the street, do animals think? And I don't mean do they respond to the environment. We all have instincts. The animal says food, friend, mate, predator. Those are instinctual drives that all life seems to be wired to, at least all animal life. But if you ask, do they truly think? Do they feel? Do they know? Do they understand? Well, if you're an animal lover or pet owner, most of us will say, yes, I think my dog loves me. If you ask some men and women, depending on their culture, they might say, no. For example, there are a number of religions that believe that humans are higher order, that they are the top developmental cycle, and then all other animals are separate, no matter how advanced they may appear, are simply different from humans. Now, if you ask psychologists, do animals think, do animals feel? We answer with a pretty resounding maybe. And as I said, it's because it's very difficult to test animals and then infer what's going on inside. Because ultimately, until we find a way to truly communicate to another species, if I could plug in a computer to a dog's brain and words appear on the screen, then I can start to make some definite answers. And it brings us to two common problems in researching animals. One is anthropomorphism, one side of the spectrum. It's where we just start assuming that animals are like us. Since I have feelings, all the other animals must have feelings like mine. So that dog is ashamed, that dog is afraid, that dog is happy, that dog is sad. Those are terms we use. And let's be fair, as a pet owner, as an animal lover, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with talking like that. As a scientist, as a researcher, you need to be very careful with that language. Because when you say things like, my dog loves me, you are making an inference based on of behavior. The animal has not directly communicated that to you. You instead are using behavior to guess. The joke I like to make is as much as I like to believe that my dog loves me, I freely admit that the face my dog makes when I say she loves me is the same face she makes when she's about to eat food. And it's the same face she makes when she's just really hot. So in those regards, I realize I am filling in the blanks. And as a pet owner, that's fine. As a scientist, if I were doing research on this dog, I must be careful. But you can make a mistake on the other end of the spectrum, and that's called anthropocentrism, the belief that humans are totally unique, that we share no quality or no similarities with other life on this planet. And that's absolutely untrue. Genetically, if nothing else, we have many similarities, but there certainly is plenty of evidence that animals, and we are animals too, share similar behavioral tendencies, especially the closer we get on that family tree. Now, there's definitely some interesting animals out there that we can talk about. Your book has quite a few that you can read on, so I won't go over them now. I was just reading about Alex, the African gray parrot. We know parrots and other birds can mimic sounds. That doesn't mean they're intelligent. In fact, they're just mimicking noises. But Alex was an interesting study, as have been some other gray parrots, in the ability to actually retain information, to memorize quite a few objects, and to identify items on properties. In a more advanced version of that, dolphins, which are one of our favorite mammals to study because they seem to have a very, we'll use the word intelligence, at least advanced cognition, an ability to identify objects, and not just that, qualities of objects. They're able to communicate in very complicated ways. In fact, some zoologists believe that dolphins give other dolphins names based on the communication patterns that they found. There's even neat stories of unique problem solving. One of my favorite anecdotal examples was there's an aquarium that taught dolphins to pick up trash that falls in the water and to bring that trash back for a fish. That way they keep their tank clean. Well, that's a pet trick. That's not advanced cognition, but it's interesting. What was more interesting was there was one dolphin that always had trash, even though there was none in the tank. So in observing this dolphin, they found out that he or she, I can't remember the sex, would take the trash and instead of dropping it off, would hide it, would basically create a store of trash hidden. Whenever the dolphin was hungry, it would pull trash off and bring it to eat. So it's a pretty unique problem-solving behavior. If there's any animals that we are most interested in studying, though, it's the great apes, chimpanzees, gorillas, others in those ape families. Not only is that because simply they look a lot like us, and that sort of intrigues our imagination, but because at a genetic level, especially if we look at chimpanzees, which we share a common ancestor with, they have roughly 98% of our genes. Right now, if there are any people around you, all humans, you're about 99.1% the same as every human on this planet. So those couple of percentage points make a difference, but it shows you just how close we are on this family tree. Chimpanzees, typically around 97, 98%. So what we ask as scientists and psychologists is that enough of a percentage point? Is that genetic construct enough to demonstrate that maybe their brains are developed close enough to ours, similar enough to ours, that they may actually feel and think and experience things in at least some way that we do? That's a difficult question to answer. For example, do chimps know that they're alive? Like, are they self-aware? Do they realize they are individuals? And again, until we can talk to them, we don't really know. But there are some interesting signs. One of my favorites is called the mirror test. If you put a mirror in front of usually around a 3-4 month old baby, but sometimes it might take longer, that baby will look at themselves in the mirror. And if you have, let's pretend you put a little dot on their nose. They will see their self in the mirror. They will see the dot on their nose, and they will reach up and take the dot off their own nose. What that's implying to us is the child seems to recognize that's me in the mirror. Well, currently there's only two animals that consistently pass the mirror test. That's chimpanzees and orangutans. There are occasionally other animals, occasionally a dog or an elephant or a giraffe will do that. It's pretty interesting. But if you give chimpanzees mirrors, they will all use that to groom parts of their body that they can't normally see. So does it prove self-awareness? No, but it's at least showing that some thinking is going on. The idea that that's me in the reflection. Versus, if my dog sees himself in the reflection, he thinks that's another dog and he'll bark. If there is one famous animal to talk about, probably it's Koko the gorilla. Some of you are familiar with Koko's story. She's a gorilla that learned American Sign Language, still alive today. In fact, you can visit her website, koko.org, where her handlers have kind of a video blog and ask her questions, and you can kind of watch that. What's been interesting about Koko is she's mastered roughly 400 to 500 signs, which is about the equivalent of a 4 or 5 year old human child. In those signs, she has used concepts such as yesterday and tomorrow. Well, that's talking about time, which, as I mentioned in an earlier video, is incredibly complicated cognition, and we weren't exactly sure if animals can do that. Here's a sign that it might be true. Koko raised a kitten for the while until the kitten died, and she experienced what seemed like mourning behavior and communicated that in her sign language. And several years ago, even basically decided she wanted to be a mom and communicated that. And they did sort of a video dating, though as of this time, it's been several years. I do not believe she ever had a child. Again, you can pop onto her website, some pretty interesting stuff there. There's been criticism about Koko's research, mainly that gorilla hands are not as dexterous as human hands, and so maybe the sign language is sort of ambiguous and humans are interpreting what they think the hands are doing, and that's fair. So we've had other experiments such as Kanzi, who was a bonobo, and we taught them to use a keyboard. Basically, instead of keys on the keyboard, imagine if it was pictures, a whole bunch of pictures, typically called lexicograms, and you can look that up on Google. And so instead of spelling out words on the keyboard, you poke buttons. So you might have some of the buttons are nouns, some of them are verbs. So you might poke "I want food." In this case, there's no ambiguity because you're constructing the sentence using those symbols. And again, we saw some interesting ways to communicate. What was of interest of Kanzi was he was not originally being taught this. His mother was. He was just hanging around, but seemed to pick it up pretty quickly and became the focus just simply by sort of process of being around the lesson. So pretty cool there. Ultimately, this is all still things that we are studying, and it's actually a research topic, so some of you might be writing about. It's pretty fascinating. Like I said, we have to be very cautious what we say in terms of my dog is jealous or this gorilla is sad. I'll be honest, the research is seeming to indicate that those statements are true. Those are factual statements. But until we can directly communicate to the animal, until I can talk to my dog and through whatever device my dog can then say, yes, I am happy, then we must realize that we are making inferences and must be careful with it. Alright, well, I hope you guys enjoyed the videos for Chapter 7. We'll stop there, and we'll see you soon for our next one.